In a quiet, late-night traffic stop, Officer Bradley wrongly arrests Samuel Johnson, a distinguished judge, based on prejudice. What starts as a simple case of mistaken identity soon becomes a high-profile courtroom drama, exposing systemic racism and challenging the justice system. Samuel's brave decision to stay silent and fight from within turns his ordeal into a powerful symbol of resistance and reform. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. In the dead of night, a seemingly routine traffic stop takes a disturbing turn when Officer Bradley, a young and visibly prejudiced cop, mistakenly arrests Samuel Johnson, a man he wrongfully suspects of criminal activity based solely on his appearance. Samuel Johnson is no ordinary individual. He is a distinguished judge with a profound commitment to upholding justice and integrity. Rather than challenging the officer's prejudiced assumptions, Samuel chooses to endure the arrest quietly, harboring a strategic plan to reveal and address the systemic flaws from within the very system he serves. As Samuel is wrongfully detained, what begins as a baseless accusation quickly escalates into a high-profile courtroom drama that captures the nation's attention. Amid a packed courtroom, Samuel reveals his true identity as a respected judge. This revelation sends shockwaves through the community and the judicial system, compelling both to confront their ingrained biases and prejudices. The ensuing media frenzy, coupled with public outrage and personal threats against Samuel, transforms his struggle into a potent symbol of resistance against systemic racism and injustice. Samuel's battle against the flawed system becomes a poignant illustration of the high stakes involved in the fight for equality and truth. His journey through this tumultuous period challenges the community to reflect on its prejudices and prompts a broader discussion about the need for systemic reform. Yet, the cost of Samuel's courageous stand is substantial. He must navigate a perilous path filled with personal and professional risks, questioning whether the price of his fight for justice might ultimately be too steep. Justice and Silence is a gripping narrative that explores themes of courage, identity, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world that often seeks to suppress it. Samuel Johnson was driving through the dimly lit streets of the city, the monotonous hum of his car the only sound breaking the serene stillness of the night. The community meeting he had attended had stretched longer than he had anticipated, but Samuel felt invigorated. It was the kind of gathering that reaffirmed his reasons for becoming a judge. To witness neighbors coming together, articulating their concerns, and collectively seeking ways to support and uplift one another. As he maneuvered down the nearly deserted road, his thoughts wandered back to a passionate young man from the meeting who had spoken earnestly about the scarcity of opportunities for people in his situation. Samuel had handed him his card, assuring him of his support and willingness to help in any way possible. The streetlights above flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows that danced across his windshield. Samuel was nearing home when a sudden flash of blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror, startling him from his reverie. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard. It was well past midnight. With a slight furrow of his brow, he slowed his vehicle and maneuvered to the side of the road. His heartbeat quickened slightly, though he reassured himself that he had done nothing wrong. Unfortunately, these reassurances seemed less comforting given the current climate. Officer Bradley exited his squad car, his hand resting noticeably on his holstered gun as he approached Samuel's vehicle. The officer's stance projected authority, but Samuel detected an underlying nervousness in his movements. "License and registration," Bradley demanded, his tone sharp and lacking the usual courtesy. Samuel handed over his documents without a word, his gaze steady as he observed Bradley scanning his license. The officer's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he glanced back at Samuel. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" Bradley asked, his voice tinged with a hint of accusation. "I'm heading home from a community meeting," Samuel replied calmly, keeping his hands visibly resting on the steering wheel. Bradley's eyes flickered with an unsettling mix of doubt and distrust. "Mind if I take a look inside the car?" Bradley inquired, his tone suggesting a presumption of guilt. Samuel knew he had the right to refuse, but he chose to comply, aiming to avoid escalating the situation further. "Go ahead," Samuel responded, his voice steady despite the underlying tension of the encounter. Bradley's search was intrusive and aggressive, as he tore through Samuel's belongings with a careless disregard. He rummaged through papers and personal items as if he were on a mission to find something incriminating, his frustration growing with each unproductive minute. Samuel's composed demeanor seemed to irk him further, and after several minutes of fruitless searching, Bradley's frustration reached its peak. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car," Bradley demanded, his tone harsh and commanding. He grasped Samuel's arm with a firm grip, pulling him out of the vehicle with a sense of authority that bordered on aggression. Samuel offered no resistance. He merely stood silently on the sidewalk as Bradley conducted a rough and aggressive pat-down, his thoughts already beginning to weigh the potential consequences of this confrontation. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Bradley sneered, clearly anticipating a defensive outburst. Samuel looked him directly in the eye, his expression unshaken and steady despite the mounting tension. "I have nothing to say." The street around them was desolate, with only the cold, indifferent street lights as witnesses to Bradley's overreach. Bradley's face contorted with rage at Samuel's calm and composed response. "Turn around," Bradley barked, reaching for his handcuffs. Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, but he maintained his composure. "I haven't resisted anything," Samuel replied evenly. Bradley's grip tightened as the handcuffs clicked shut around Samuel's wrists with a finality that sent a jolt of apprehension through Samuel's chest. Bradley roughly guided him toward the squad car, his voice a low, irritable murmur. "You people always think you can get away with everything," Bradley muttered, his frustration evident as he shoved Samuel into the back seat of the patrol car. Samuel sat in silence, his mind racing. He could have revealed his identity at that moment, potentially ending the situation, but he understood that doing so would only address the immediate issue, not the broader systemic problems. Instead, he took a deep breath and resolved to observe and navigate where this ordeal would lead him. He watched as Bradley settled into the driver's seat, his expression self-satisfied and smug. "You just had to make it difficult, huh?" Bradley said, glancing back at Samuel through the rearview mirror. "Now look where you ended up." Samuel chose not to respond. Instead, he gazed out of the window, watching the city he loved blur past him. The weight of what lay ahead began to sink in. This situation had transcended his predicament. It symbolized the broader injustices faced by countless individuals who had been stopped, questioned, or worse, simply because of their appearance. The police station was a stark contrast to the outside world, filled with harsh lights and colder attitudes. Samuel was processed with clinical efficiency, fingerprinted, photographed, and then relegated to a holding cell. The other detainees observed him with curious eyes, but Samuel kept to himself, settling quietly in a corner. He scrutinized the officers as they went about their duties, noting the dismissive glances and whispered conversations. Bradley, reveling in his sense of accomplishment, strutted around the station, boasting about the catch he had made. His colleagues, impressed or perhaps merely amused, offered nods of approval and a few congratulatory pats on the back. Samuel listened intently as Bradley recounted the arrest, embellishing the details to cast himself in a more favorable light. It was a performance Samuel had witnessed in courtrooms before, false bravado masking deeper insecurities. Detective Laura Martinez, a seasoned officer known for her commitment to integrity and procedural correctness, observed Bradley with a skeptical eye. She had heard the tale of the arrest, but something about the narrative didn't sit well with her. Approaching Bradley, her tone was sharp and inquisitive. "Is this the guy you brought in?" she asked, nodding towards Samuel's cell. Bradley, with a smirk still evident on his face, nodded in response. "Yeah, caught him acting shady in a bad part of town. Didn't want to cooperate." Laura's gaze shifted to Samuel, who met her eyes with a calm, composed expression. There was something about his demeanor, even confined to a holding cell, that struck her as peculiar. "What's his name?" Laura asked, her curiosity piqued by the unusual calmness Samuel exhibited amidst the chaos. "Samuel Johnson," Bradley replied, his voice dripping with contempt. "Probably just another thug trying to play innocent." Laura's gaze lingered on Samuel for a moment longer before she turned away, her mind racing with the need to uncover more about him. She made a mental note to investigate further, sensing that there was more to this story than met the eye. Her instincts had rarely steered her wrong, and she intended to follow them. That night, Samuel endured a restless and uncomfortable vigil in the dimly lit cell. The cacophony of the police station seemed to echo relentlessly. The jangling of keys, the clanging of doors, and the murmur of indistinct conversations. He shut his eyes, trying to escape the noise, and allowed his thoughts to drift back to the community meeting he had attended earlier. He remembered the earnest faces of the people who had looked to him for guidance and justice. Their expectations and trust were the reasons he chose to remain silent now, to withstand this temporary indignity with fortitude. As the first light of dawn began to seep into the cell, Samuel was jolted awake by the harsh, metallic clank of the cell door being opened. An officer called his name brusquely, and Samuel was escorted out, his wrists still shackled, to face his hearing. He walked down the narrow, gray corridors with a sense of determination, his head held high. Each step felt like a stride closer to the moment of truth that awaited him. In the courtroom lobby, Samuel's daughter Maya was pacing anxiously. Her eyes were wide with disbelief and worry as she caught sight of him. She hurried over, her face etched with concern and confusion. "Dad, what happened? They told me you were arrested. This can't be real." Maya's voice trembled, reflecting her mixture of frustration and fear. Samuel managed a small, reassuring smile, attempting to ease her anxiety. "It's all right, Maya. Everything will be fine. But why didn't you tell them who you are?" Maya's voice was a mix of frustration and desperation. "You don't have to go through this." Samuel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression a blend of calmness and resolve. "Sometimes it's not about what we have to go through, but about what we're willing to endure. This is bigger than me." Maya nodded slowly, her eyes still filled with apprehension. She knew her father well enough to understand his stubborn resolve, but witnessing him endure this hardship was incredibly difficult. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with a blend of usual morning hustle and heightened anticipation. Samuel was led into the courtroom, and the sight of him in prison attire elicited whispers and curious glances from the assembled audience. Officer Bradley stood with a self-assured demeanor near the judge's bench, ready to present his case. Samuel's eyes scanned the room, mentally bracing himself for the legal battle that lay ahead. The room was abuzz with the murmur of spectators, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Samuel noticed Detective Martinez among them, her brow furrowed in concentration as she watched him intently. He gave her a subtle nod, acknowledging her presence before shifting his focus to the judge. His expression remained composed and resolute as the hearing commenced. Even in his silence, Samuel's dignified presence commanded attention. He knew that this hearing was not just about defending himself, but about revealing a truth that would challenge those who believed they were beyond reproach. The courtroom was alive with the hum of anticipation, and Samuel, still clad in his prison garb, stood tall amidst a sea of journalists, onlookers, and colleagues, all waiting to see what would unfold. This was not merely a routine hearing. It was a pivotal moment in the quest for justice that promised to shift the balance of power. The presiding judge, a formidable and authoritative figure renowned for her strict, no-nonsense approach to the courtroom, cast a brief, discerning glance at Samuel before turning her attention to the docket. Officer Bradley stood near the prosecution table, his demeanor a blend of self-assured confidence and an unmistakable air of smugness. With a disdainful glance in Samuel's direction, Bradley's contempt was palpable. Samuel, however, met his gaze with an inscrutable and neutral expression, showing no sign of the irritation or fear Bradley seemed to anticipate. "Let's get this over with," Bradley muttered under his breath to his partner, a fellow officer whose uncertain demeanor suggested a lack of confidence in the proceedings. As Samuel moved towards the defense table, the murmurs of the courtroom swelled, creating a low hum of speculation and anticipation. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Samuel could almost feel the collective focus of every spectator, their eyes keenly fixed on him. Amidst the sea of faces, He noticed Detective Laura Martinez standing quietly in the back of the room. Her gaze was steady and direct, a brief flicker of recognition passing between them. Samuel acknowledged her with a subtle nod, a gesture of silent acknowledgement amid the courtroom drama. The judge, sensing the need to restore order, rapped her gavel decisively, silencing the room and drawing everyone's attention to the front. Her voice, clear and commanding, cut through the ambient noise as she addressed the court. "We are here today to address the charges against the defendant, Samuel Johnson," she declared with authority. "Officer Bradley, you may proceed with your presentation." Bradley stepped forward with a practiced and somewhat patronizing smirk adorning his lips. He appeared thoroughly prepared to present his version of events, anticipating a routine outcome where his narrative would be swiftly accepted without question. As Samuel took his seat at the defense table, the tension in the room grew more palpable, hinting at the fact that this hearing was destined to deviate from the ordinary. Bradley mounted the witness stand, adjusting his uniform with a deliberate show of confidence as he faced the court. His voice, laced with assurance, began recounting his version of the arrest with a series of exaggerated and embellished details. "I observed the defendant acting suspiciously in a high-crime area," Bradley began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Upon my approach, he displayed a lack of cooperation, refused to identify himself, and resisted what I deemed a lawful search." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Samuel's gaze remained fixed on Bradley, his expression one of calm detachment. He noted every instance of hyperbole and every subtly slanted remark intended to portray him as a threat. He observed the judge's slight nods of acknowledgement as she followed Bradley's narrative, and he saw the jurors, pens moving rapidly, appearing engrossed in the testimony. Bradley continued, his voice carrying the self-assured ring of someone who believed his position granted him unquestionable authority. "I adhered strictly to all procedural protocols and employed only the minimal amount of force necessary to ensure both my safety and that of the community. The defendant's behavior was erratic, which provided me with reasonable grounds to suspect his involvement in criminal activities." As Bradley's testimony unfolded, Samuel cast a sidelong glance at the judge, catching a hint of skepticism in her eyes. It was evident she was accustomed to Bradley's dramatic flair and, while attentive, was awaiting something more substantive before forming a final judgment. With a deliberate gesture, Samuel raised his hand to signal his desire to speak. The judge, recognizing his request, permitted him. "Mr. Johnson, do you have anything to add?" she inquired, her tone neutral but expectant. Rising from his seat, Samuel's calm and composed demeanor starkly contrasted with Bradley's blustery confidence. "I would like to address several inaccuracies in Officer Bradley's testimony," Samuel stated firmly, his voice steady and unwavering. The judge nodded in acknowledgement, signaling him to proceed. Samuel made his way to the front of the courtroom, his steps deliberate and purposeful. He faced the assembly of jurors, the judge, and finally, Bradley, who shifted uneasily under the intense scrutiny. "Officer Bradley has painted a picture of a suspicious and non-compliant encounter," Samuel began, his tone clear and assertive. "However, the reality of our interaction was far less dramatic. I complied with every request made, responded to every question, and conducted myself with the same respect and civility I afford everyone, regardless of their position or uniform." The judge leaned forward slightly, clearly intrigued by Samuel's demeanor. Samuel, in turn, continued with a methodical calm, meticulously dismantling Bradley's narrative with precise clarity. "There were no raised voices, no aggression on my part," Samuel stated, his tone steady and authoritative. "I complied with the search, not out of fear, but because I understand the importance of cooperating with law enforcement." Officer Bradley's claims of resistance are not only false, they represent a blatant attempt to rationalize an unjustifiable arrest. As Samuel spoke, Bradley's smug expression began to falter, giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. The authority and clarity with which Samuel delivered his words resonated deeply, cutting through the courtroom's tension. Samuel took a measured pause, drawing a deep breath before continuing. "I am not a stranger to this process," he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to silence the entire room. "I am intimately familiar with it. Officer Bradley, you never bothered to inquire about my identity because you presumed you already knew." A profound silence descended upon the courtroom, thick with anticipation. Samuel reached into the inner pocket of his prison jacket and produced his judge's badge. The room collectively held its breath as he held it aloft, the emblem catching the harsh fluorescent lights and casting a gleam across the space. "I am Judge Samuel Johnson," he proclaimed, his voice resonant and clear. "I am not merely a defendant in this case. I am a judge who has dedicated his life to upholding the very laws that were distorted and abused during my arrest." The revelation struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the space, spreading from the jurors to the spectators in the back rows. The judge's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly rapped her gavel to restore order. Bradley's face turned ashen, the blood draining from his cheeks as he absorbed the gravity of Samuel's identity. Detective Martinez, who had been observing closely, shook her head slightly. Though she had suspected something was amiss, she had not anticipated the scale of the truth. "Judge Johnson," the presiding judge addressed him, her voice a mix of disbelief and burgeoning respect. "Why did you choose not to identify yourself during your arrest?" Samuel turned to face her, his expression solemn yet resolute. "Because, Your Honor, I wanted to experience firsthand what so many in our community endure daily. I sought to understand the biases and assumptions that drive actions like those exhibited by Officer Bradley." Bradley stammered, his voice betraying his disorientation. "I didn't know." Samuel cut him off with calm, unwavering firmness. "Precisely. You didn't know because you failed to look beyond your prejudices. You saw a black man driving a modest car late at night and made a judgment not based on evidence but on bias." The judge nodded thoughtfully, her expression reflecting the gravity of Samuel's words. "Judge Johnson, your statement will be taken into consideration. This hearing will be adjourned until further notice as we conduct a thorough review of these matters." As the courtroom began to empty, Samuel found himself in the hallway, a storm of emotions swirling within him. Maya, his daughter, rushed to him and enveloped him in a warm embrace. "You were incredible, Dad," she whispered, her voice a blend of pride and concern. Samuel smiled softly, holding her close. "It had to be done, Maya. People need to witness what happens behind closed doors, and they need to hear it from someone who has experienced both sides." Detective Martinez approached them, her demeanor respectful. "Judge Johnson, I want to acknowledge that your courage today is bound to make a significant impact. Your story needs to be heard by many." Samuel nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Thank you, Detective. But this is just the beginning. There is a long road ahead, and it will take more than just one voice to effect real change." Bradley, now encircled by his superiors, faced intense scrutiny over his recent actions. The unwavering confidence he once exuded had been replaced by a visibly hunched posture, his eyes darting anxiously around the room as the weight of his decisions and their public repercussions finally hit home. The reality of the situation was beginning to seep in, and the gravity of the fallout was undeniable. From his vantage point in the background, Samuel observed the scene, fully aware that this was only the initial skirmish in a much larger battle. His dramatic revelation had certainly made an impact, but it was the subsequent ripple effect, how his words would ignite action and bring about change, that truly mattered. Gently squeezing Maya's hand, Samuel spoke softly, "Let's go home," as he guided her towards the exit. The moment they stepped outside the courthouse, they were bombarded by a flurry of flashing cameras and a cacophony of reporters shouting questions. Despite the chaos around them, Samuel maintained a focused stride, determined to keep his eyes fixed straight ahead. The first crucial step in his ongoing struggle had been taken, and for the first time since his arrest, he felt a glimmer of hope. The truth had been exposed. Now the real challenge lay in the reckoning that would follow. As they emerged into the street, they were met by a roiling sea of reporters and protesters, their collective voices creating a chaotic symphony of questions, chants, and the relentless clatter of camera shutters. Samuel and Maya were shielded by a few supportive colleagues and friends who helped navigate the tumultuous crowd. The moment Samuel had revealed his true identity in the courtroom had already become a viral sensation, and the media frenzy was insatiable, craving every bit of new information. Judge Johnson! Judge Johnson! The reporters clamored, thrusting microphones, phones, and cameras in his direction. What do you have to say about the accusations against you? With a raised hand, Samuel signaled for silence. Gradually, the crowd quieted, their curiosity piqued by his calm and composed demeanor. Clearing his throat, Samuel's voice cut through the din with authority. "This isn't just about me," he began, his tone resolute yet measured. "This is about the systemic issues we confront daily, biases that impact not just one individual but entire communities." A reporter, notebook poised, pressed forward. "Do you feel targeted because of your race, Judge Johnson?" Samuel nodded slightly, acknowledging the pointed question. Racial profiling is an unfortunate reality for many people, and last night served as a stark reminder of that fact. However, my role as a judge provides me with a platform to shine a light on these injustices and advocate for significant change. Exposing the issue is just the beginning. We must also demand accountability and strive for tangible solutions. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The crowd buzzed with renewed energy, some showing their approval with applause while others engaged in fervent whispers. Samuel scanned the sea of faces before him, observing a mix of hope, skepticism, and determination. His words seemed to resonate, and for now, that was a small but significant victory. Maya, standing close by, gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "You're amazing, Dad. This is going to make a difference." Samuel managed a faint smile in response. "I hope so, Maya, but this is merely the start. We have a long journey ahead of us." Navigating through the throng of supporters and journalists, Samuel's resolve solidified. He understood that while the media spotlight was a potent force, it could be fleeting. It was crucial to use this momentum strategically to drive the change he envisioned. Back at the police station, the atmosphere was tense and charged. Officer Bradley sat in a small, sterile interrogation room, flanked by his union representative and his superior, Captain Reynolds. Detective Laura Martinez observed from the observation window, her arms crossed and her expression one of deep disapproval. "This is a complete mess," Captain Reynolds said, rubbing his temples in frustration. "Do you have any idea of the magnitude of the fallout we're facing because of your actions?" Bradley fidgeted nervously in his seat, the once confident demeanor now completely eroded. I didn't know he was a judge," he stammered, his voice betraying a lack of the bravado he once displayed. "That's exactly the problem," Reynolds snapped back. "You didn't know, and you didn't make any effort to find out. You made assumptions, and now we're all suffering the consequences of your oversight." Bradley looked down, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "I was just doing my job," he muttered defensively, trying to justify his actions. Martinez entered the room with a sense of determination, each step measured and deliberate. As she approached the table where Bradley was seated, she placed a thick folder down with a firm thud. The sound seemed to punctuate her presence, underscoring the gravity of the moment. Her gaze was unwavering as she addressed Bradley with a sharp, authoritative tone. "Your responsibility is to uphold the law and ensure it is applied justly, not to misuse or distort it for personal gain," she said, her voice cutting through the air with a sense of urgency. "We are initiating a comprehensive internal investigation into this incident, and I strongly suggest you start taking this matter very seriously, Bradley. This issue is not something that can be easily brushed aside." Bradley's throat tightened as he swallowed, the full weight of his actions beginning to press down on him. He cast a fleeting glance at Martinez, her eyes a mirror of resolute determination, and for the first time, he truly grasped the severity of his predicament. His career, and more crucially, his integrity, were hanging precariously in the balance. "Detective Martinez," he started, his voice tinged with apprehension, "what are the next steps in this process?" Martinez regarded him with a more measured expression, her face softening just a fraction, though her demeanor remained serious. "You must cooperate fully with the investigation," she explained, her tone firm but slightly less severe. "Only then can we begin to address and rectify the damage that has been caused. But you need to be prepared to fully acknowledge your role in this situation, every aspect of it." As Martinez turned to leave the room, Bradley leaned back in his chair, the full gravity of his situation beginning to sink in. The investigation was not solely about his actions. It was a reflection of systemic issues within the entire department and a broader culture that had allowed biases to persist unchecked. He realized that he faced a crucial decision: whether to continue evading responsibility or to confront the reality of his actions and attempt to make amends. Meanwhile, at the community center, a lively rally was in full swing. Individuals of various ages, backgrounds, and walks of life had gathered, united in their support for Samuel and in their quest to address the broader implications of his case. The walls were adorned with vibrant posters bearing slogans such as "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling," creating an atmosphere thick with solidarity and determination. Samuel and Maya stood prominently at the front of the gathering, flanked by community leaders and activists, their presence a beacon of hope and resolve. Detective Martinez was also present, blending into the crowd but keeping a vigilant eye on the proceedings. Her role in the event was a testament to her commitment to justice. Samuel took to the microphone, his voice carrying a sense of gravity and hope as it reverberated through the hall. "Thank you all for coming out today," Samuel began, his eyes sweeping over the sea of faces. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is part of a larger systemic issue that affects countless individuals every single day. But together, we have the power to challenge and push back against these injustices." A young man in the crowd raised his hand, a look of earnest curiosity on his face. "Judge Johnson, what actions can we take? How can we make a meaningful difference?" Samuel's face lit up with a reassuring smile, buoyed by the question. "It starts with raising awareness," he responded. "Speak out against injustices when you see them, support those who are working tirelessly for change, and hold those in positions of power accountable for their actions. We must be the driving force behind the change we wish to see." Maya stepped forward, her voice imbued with passion and resolve. "And never underestimate the impact of your vote, your voice, and your actions. This fight is not just about one legal case. It's about fundamentally transforming the system from the ground up." The crowd erupted into a resounding applause, the energy and enthusiasm palpable in the room. Samuel looked on, his heart swelling with pride, not only for his daughter but also for the entire community that was rallying behind a cause that extended beyond any single person. After the rally, Detective Martinez approached Samuel, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "That was a truly powerful message, Judge. People must hear and understand it." Samuel nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Detective. Your presence here today means a great deal to us." Martinez shrugged modestly, her expression reflecting a deep sense of commitment. "I'm simply doing what I believe is right. Each of us must contribute to this effort." Samuel regarded her with a nod of respect. "Indeed, it will take all of us working together to make a difference." In a quiet, dimly lit office at the police station, a tense meeting was unfolding. The room was charged with an air of unresolved conflict as Bradley sat across from Samuel and Detective Martinez. The normally confident and assertive Bradley appeared markedly subdued, his usual bravado replaced by a mixture of guilt and defensiveness that was palpable. His eyes, once full of self-assuredness, now darted nervously from one person to another. Samuel, taking the lead in this charged encounter, began with a tone that was both polite and unwavering. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us today, Officer Bradley," he started, his voice calm yet carrying a weight of authority. "This meeting is an opportunity for you to explain your actions. It's not just about addressing the issue for my sake, but about uncovering the underlying reasons behind these actions. This understanding is crucial if we're going to move forward constructively." Bradley shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident as he fidgeted with the edge of his shirt. "I made a mistake," he admitted quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't trust my own eyes. I thought I saw something different from what was there." Samuel nodded thoughtfully, his gaze never wavering from Bradley's. "We all make mistakes, Bradley," he said, his voice carrying a note of empathy. "The real question is, what can we learn from them?" Bradley looked up, meeting Samuel's gaze with a hint of vulnerability. "I've been working in law enforcement for several years now. Over time, I've encountered so many situations that made me wary of everyone around me. I guess I allowed that wariness to cloud my judgment." Samuel responded with a gentle, yet pointed reminder. "That's the danger of unchecked biases," he said. "They don't just impact the individuals we are sworn to protect, they also erode the integrity of the entire system." Detective Martinez, who had been listening intently throughout the exchange, leaned forward with a sense of urgency. "Bradley, if you are sincere about making amends, there is a clear path forward. You need to fully cooperate with the ongoing investigation, be transparent about the events that transpired, and actively support the forthcoming reforms." Bradley nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling on him. "I am prepared to do that," he said earnestly. "I don't want this to be my legacy." Samuel extended his hand, offering a gesture of redemption. "It's never too late to make things right," he said, his voice imbued with a tone of hopeful encouragement. The notion of doing the right thing seemed to resonate with Bradley, who hesitated momentarily before shaking Samuel's hand. In that brief, yet significant moment, there was a glimmer of hope, a faint but meaningful possibility that change, no matter how incremental, was within reach. Later, back at Samuel's home, the atmosphere was one of exhaustion mingled with resolute determination. Samuel sat at his dining room table, surrounded by a team of legal advisors and community leaders, each absorbed in the task at hand. Maya, his dedicated daughter, was by his side, diligently taking notes and contributing her insightful observations. One of the lawyers spoke up, outlining their strategy. "We have a solid foundation for legal action against the police department," he said. "However, our approach needs to be strategic. This is not just about securing a legal victory, it's about setting a precedent that will drive broader change." Samuel nodded, his mind already processing the implications. "I agree," he said thoughtfully. "This case extends beyond my personal experience. We must advocate for extensive judicial reforms to ensure that such injustices are prevented in the future." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Maya chimed in, her voice reflecting her deep understanding of the situation. "We also need to maintain community engagement. This is not merely a legal battle. It's a societal challenge that requires the active participation of the public." Samuel beamed with pride at his daughter's perceptiveness and fervor. "Exactly, Maya," he said. "We must keep the momentum going, both in the legal arena and within the community." As the meeting drew to a close, Samuel stood by the window, gazing out at the neighborhood he had long served and protected. He was acutely aware of the difficulties that lay ahead, challenges fraught with resistance and obstacles. Yet, with Maya's unwavering support, the backing of the community, and a reinvigorated sense of purpose, he felt prepared to confront whatever trials awaited him. When Samuel arrived at the city council chambers, the room was abuzz with anticipation. Community leaders and activists had gathered, their presence a testament to the collective desire for change. The council members, seated behind a long table, observed the crowd with a blend of interest and skepticism. Samuel took his place at the podium, flanked by Maya and Detective Martinez, who had become a steadfast ally in this endeavor. Clearing his throat, Samuel began, his voice steady and resonant. "Members of the council, I stand before you not only as a judge, but as a citizen who has endured the direct consequences of unchecked biases within our law enforcement system. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is a manifestation of deeper, systemic issues that must be addressed. It is time we confront these injustices head-on and work towards meaningful reform." Councilman Avery, a distinguished older man known for his stern demeanor and unwavering principles, leaned forward in his seat, his expression one of careful deliberation. "Judge Johnson," he began, his voice steady but laced with concern, "we have all heard your story, and we do indeed sympathize with the experiences you've shared. However, we must consider the broader implications of the sweeping changes you are proposing. Such reforms could significantly disrupt the functioning of our police force and potentially create more issues than they resolve. Samuel, unwavering in his resolve, met Avery's intense gaze without flinching. Councilman, the real disruption we should be concerned about is the disruption of individuals' lives when they are wrongfully targeted and mistreated. This reform is not about undermining the police force. Rather, it is about fortifying it. It's about rebuilding trust between the officers and the communities they are sworn to protect and serve. At this moment, Maya, her presence commanding attention, stepped forward with a blend of determination and clarity in her voice. This issue goes beyond my father's personal experience. It encompasses every individual who has been unfairly stopped, searched, or subjected to mistreatment simply because of their skin color. We are not advocating for chaos or disorder. We are calling for accountability and justice. We are seeking essential reforms, training, oversight, and transparency to ensure that law enforcement operates equitably and respects the rights of every citizen. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and several council members nodded in acknowledgement, though some still appeared unconvinced. Avery sighed deeply, adjusting his glasses as he looked around the room. We will consider your proposals. However, I must caution that I cannot guarantee a swift resolution. There are numerous factors to weigh and address. Samuel nodded, his expression one of determined resolve. I appreciate your willingness to consider our proposals, Councilman. However, I urge you not to postpone too long. Justice delayed is justice denied, and too many people have already waited far too long for meaningful change. As Samuel stepped back, the room erupted in applause. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of momentum. Even though the path to reform remained uncertain, council members exchanged glances, recognizing that this was an issue that would not be easily dismissed. Later that evening, Samuel found himself in the solitude of his living room, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily upon him. He rubbed his temples, attempting to stave off the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. Maya entered the room, carrying a tray with a steaming pot of tea and a small plate of sandwiches. "You need to take a break and eat something, Dad," Maya said softly, placing the tray on the coffee table and taking a seat beside him. "You've been working nonstop since all of this began." Samuel looked up, offering her a weary smile. "Thank you, Maya. It's just that there's so much to consider. The council's reluctance, the media pressure, and even the criticism from within the judiciary. It's all becoming quite overwhelming." Maya sat next to him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I understand that it's a lot to handle, but remember that you don't have to face this alone. You have the support of the community, and we're not going to let this fight fizzle out." Samuel sighed deeply, leaning back against the couch as he took a sip of the tea. "Sometimes it feels like for every step forward, we end up taking 2 steps back. The council isn't fully on board, the media attention is exhausting, and I'm even facing pushback from colleagues who think I've overstepped my bounds." Maya squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "You always taught me that real change is never easy. It's messy, it's challenging, but it's worth it. You've already inspired so many people to stand up and speak out. Giving up now is not an option." Samuel nodded, the warmth of the tea soothing him, but it was Maya's encouraging words that truly revitalized his spirits. "You're right, Maya. I need to remind myself why I started this fight in the first place." Maya's eyes shone with pride as she smiled at him. "You're not just fighting for yourself, Dad. You're fighting for all of us." Samuel reached over, pulling her into a heartfelt hug. "I'm so grateful to have you by my side. Together, we'll get through this." The following day, Samuel and Maya attended a community workshop at the local center, organized in response to the ongoing efforts for reform. The room was filled with community members eager to learn about their rights and how they could contribute to the movement for change. Standing before the gathered crowd, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He addressed the attendees with a voice that carried the weight of his conviction. "Thank you all for coming here today. What we are doing in this workshop goes beyond just exchanging information. It's about empowering ourselves and one another. Knowledge is one of the most potent tools we possess, and understanding our rights is the first crucial step toward holding this system accountable. Together, we can effect meaningful change and ensure justice for everyone. Detective Martinez, who had become a fixture at these community gatherings, stepped forward to assist with the presentation. Today, we're going to cover the fundamentals of understanding your rights during police encounters, the process for filing complaints, and the crucial role of community oversight. These topics are not just relevant in the wake of what happened with Judge Johnson. They're vital for our everyday lives and interactions with law enforcement. The participants were deeply engaged, their attentiveness evident as they asked questions and shared personal stories about their encounters with police. Samuel watched with a sense of pride swelling within him as Maya led a breakout group. Her passion for justice was palpable, and her ability to convey it resonated through every word she spoke. During a break in the workshop, Martinez approached Samuel, her demeanor one of admiration and respect. "It's remarkable what you've achieved here. This initiative is no longer just about a single case. It has grown into a movement." Samuel nodded, his expression reflecting deep thought. "That's the hope, Laura. We need to foster enduring change, not just a fleeting moment of attention. People are ready for it, and that's what drives me forward." Martinez offered a warm smile. "You're doing more than just addressing your situation, Judge. You're giving people a voice, and that's something they won't soon forget." As the workshop resumed, Samuel felt the weight of his earlier doubts begin to lift. The proactive stance of the community and the palpable sense of unity in the room were clear indicators that their efforts were making a real difference. This movement had transcended any one individual, and Samuel was grateful to be a part of it. A week later, the courthouse was once again filled with anticipation as Samuel and his supporters awaited the ruling on the proposed reforms. The atmosphere was thick with nervous energy, each person in the room keenly aware of the significance of the moment. Samuel stood alongside Maya and his legal team, his face a mask of calm determination despite the tension that crackled in the air. When the judge finally entered and called the session to order, a profound silence fell over the room. Samuel's heart raced as he listened intently to the judge's preamble, which detailed the complexities of the proposed changes and the legal hurdles they faced. After thorough consideration, the judge announced, her voice steady and measured, "The court acknowledges that the proposed reforms have merit. However, due to procedural and budgetary constraints, they cannot be implemented immediately. We recommend a phased approach with a further review scheduled in 6 months." A collective sigh of disappointment swept through the room. Samuel clenched his jaw, the weight of the delayed response sinking in. He had anticipated this possibility, but hearing it confirmed was still disheartening. Maya leaned in, her voice a whisper of encouragement. "We're not finished yet, Dad. This is just a setback." Samuel nodded in agreement, though his frustration was apparent. Rising to address the crowd as they began to disperse, he spoke with resolute conviction. "I understand this isn't the outcome we had hoped for, but this isn't the end. We must continue to push forward, holding those in power accountable. Change is a process, and though it may take time, our unity and persistence will lead us to our goal." The crowd applauded, their enthusiasm tempered by the disappointing news. Samuel watched as they gradually left, his mind already formulating new strategies. He understood that setbacks were an inherent part of any meaningful struggle, but he was determined to maintain momentum and drive the movement forward. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Later that evening, Officer Bradley sat alone in a dimly lit diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Suspended pending further investigation, he was left alone with the heavy burden of his actions. As he stared into the swirling depths of his coffee cup, his mind was a tangled web of regret, defensiveness, and shame. The quiet of the diner was interrupted by a familiar voice. "Mind if I join you?" Bradley looked up to see his former mentor, a retired officer named Hal, standing beside the table. Hal was a familiar face from Bradley's early days on the force, a figure who had always embodied the values of dedication and integrity that Bradley aspired to. Hal's presence in the room, though unexpected, carried with it a sense of reassurance and wisdom that Bradley desperately needed at this critical juncture. Bradley gestured for Hal to take a seat, his movements slow and weary, reflecting the emotional exhaustion he felt. As Hal settled into the chair across from him, Bradley could see the deep lines etched on Hal's face, evidence of a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Hal had always been a mentor in the truest sense, someone who led by example and held his colleagues to the highest standards. "Rough day?" Hal asked, his voice carrying a gravelly edge but lacking any hint of harshness. It was a question asked not just out of politeness but out of genuine concern, the kind that only comes from someone who has walked a similar path. Bradley exhaled a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as he ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "More like a rough month, Hal. Everything seems to be falling apart, and I feel like I've made a colossal mistake." Hal nodded slowly, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "I've been following the case. It's a tough one, no doubt. There's a lot of anger and frustration out there, and for good reason. But you know as well as I do that facing up to our mistakes is not just a necessity. It's a fundamental part of who we are as officers." Bradley's eyes fell to the cup of coffee in front of him, his voice barely audible as he spoke. "I know. I should have done better. I didn't fully understand the extent of the problem until it was too late. I didn't realize how deep this issue ran." Hal's eyes softened with a blend of sympathy and understanding. It's easy to get lost in the daily grind of the job and lose sight of the broader picture. We all have those moments when we're so caught up in the pressures and demands that we forget what matters. But now is the time for you to step back, reflect, and decide what kind of officer and person you want to be moving forward. Bradley met Hal's gaze, feeling the weight of his mentor's words. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "I want to make things right. I want to be someone who stands for justice, not just someone who follows orders without question." Hal placed a reassuring hand on Bradley's shoulder, the gesture both comforting and grounding. "Then you need to act on that desire. Use this difficult period as an opportunity to learn and grow. It's not too late to change the course of things, but it starts with confronting the truth and taking responsibility for your actions." Bradley nodded slowly, feeling a small but significant spark of hope amidst the overwhelming sense of despair. "Thank you, Hal. I needed to hear that. It means a lot coming from you." As Hal prepared to leave, he gave Bradley one last, encouraging nod. "Hang in there, son. The road ahead is going to be tough, but it's a path worth walking if it leads you to a place where you can reclaim your integrity and stand up for what's right." Bradley watched Hal walk away, his figure gradually fading from view. The encounter left him with a renewed sense of determination. He understood that the path to redemption would be fraught with challenges and would require significant effort and introspection. However, with the guidance and support of those who cared about him, he hoped to navigate his way back to a position of integrity and justice, ultimately finding a way to make amends and restore his sense of purpose. The pursuit of doing what is right holds significant weight, even when faced with daunting challenges. Bradley, having come to this realization, felt a newfound resolve. "I think I need to talk to Judge Johnson," he said with a determined nod. "I need to make things right." Hal, offering a supportive pat on Bradley's shoulder, replied, "That's a good start, son. Remember, it's never too late to change." As Hal departed, Bradley watched him leave, feeling a flicker of hope ignited within him. The path to redemption was not going to be easy. He knew it would be fraught with difficulties and setbacks. Yet, for the first time, Bradley was ready to embark on this journey. He was prepared to confront his past mistakes and make amends, step by step, one decision at a time. The day in the courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. The room was packed to capacity with community members, journalists, and supporters of Samuel's cause, all eager to witness the culmination of their efforts for systemic change. Samuel stood resolutely at the front, preparing to deliver his closing argument. Maya was by his side, methodically organizing the stack of statements and evidence they had diligently compiled. This was the moment they had all been working toward, a chance to push for the reforms they so fervently believed in. Samuel took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before beginning. "Your Honor, esteemed members of the court, and everyone present," he began, his voice steady and commanding attention. "Today we have heard countless stories that illustrate the profound impact of the flaws within our policing system. These are not just numbers or abstract statistics. They represent real lives, lives that have been upended by prejudice and bias, lives that are deserving of justice. He gestured towards the audience, where several community members stood ready to share their experiences. One by one, they recounted their harrowing stories of wrongful stops, aggressive encounters, and the enduring effects of racial profiling. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, each testimony resonating deeply with those in attendance. As the final testimony came to a close, Samuel turned back to address the judge. "We are not here to dismantle law enforcement," he stated firmly. "Rather, we are here to rebuild it with a foundation of accountability and fairness. The reforms we propose today, mandatory bias training, independent oversight, and transparent reporting, are essential steps toward a more equitable future. This is not just for one community, but for every community." Samuel paused, casting a meaningful glance toward Officer Bradley, who had agreed to testify in support of the proposed reforms. Bradley's once self-assured demeanor had given way to a sober and reflective resolve. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before stepping forward to address the court. "When I arrested Judge Johnson, I acted on assumptions rather than facts," Bradley admitted, his voice steady but laced with regret. "I've come to realize that these assumptions are part of a larger issue, an issue I have contributed to but am now committed to helping rectify. These reforms are necessary, and I stand with Judge Johnson in supporting them." A murmur of surprise and acknowledgement rippled through the courtroom as Bradley returned to his seat, the weight of his admission hanging heavily in the room. Samuel offered Bradley a nod of recognition, appreciating the courage it took for him to speak out. Despite their previous opposition, they now stood united in their pursuit of justice. The judge, an experienced and thoughtful woman, took a moment to gather her thoughts before delivering her verdict. The room was tense, every eye fixed on her as she shuffled through the papers and adjusted her glasses. After carefully reviewing the testimonies and evidence presented, she began, her voice measured and deliberate. "It is evident that the issues presented are both credible and urgent. The proposed reforms address systemic flaws that must be addressed if we are to uphold the principles of justice and equality." She paused, allowing her words to resonate with the audience. "Therefore, this court rules in favor of the proposed reforms, with immediate steps to implement the changes outlined. This decision reflects not only the law but our collective commitment to a fair and just society." A wave of relief and applause swept through the courtroom as the verdict was announced. Samuel exhaled deeply, the months of intense effort and anticipation culminating in this moment of triumph. Maya, overcome with emotion, hugged her father tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You did it, Dad. We did it." Samuel, his voice thick with emotion, replied, "We all did, Maya. This is just the beginning." The judge's gavel struck the bench with a resounding bang, commanding silence in the courtroom as she delivered her final statement. Let this ruling stand as a testament to the fact that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process. Today, we have made a significant stride forward, but our journey does not end here. It continues with each of us taking up the mantle of this cause. The scene at the community center was a vibrant celebration of progress and unity. Banners emblazoned with slogans like "Justice for All" and "Reform is Here" adorned the walls, creating a festive atmosphere. The room buzzed with laughter, lively music, and the enticing aroma of home-cooked dishes. Samuel entered to a chorus of cheers and applause, celebrated as a hero by the very people he had worked tirelessly to advocate for. Maya took to the stage, her voice ringing out with passionate clarity. "Today, we are not just marking a legal victory. We are celebrating a triumph for every voice that has been silenced, for every injustice that has been ignored. My father has always taught me that justice is not a destination but a journey we have advanced on today, together." Samuel joined her on the stage, taking the microphone with a sense of shared purpose. This battle was never about a single individual or a solitary case. It was about all of us coming together, standing up and challenging the status quo. What we've demonstrated here is that when we unite, change is not merely a possibility, it becomes an inevitability. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The crowd responded with an electrifying wave of applause, the energy in the room palpable and infectious. Samuel stepped down from the stage, moving through the throng of friends, family, and supporters. He shook hands, exchanged heartfelt hugs, and listened intently to words of gratitude and encouragement. It was a moment of unadulterated joy, marking the culmination of a grueling yet rewarding struggle. Detective Martinez approached Samuel, her usually reserved demeanor softened by a rare smile. "You did well, Judge. This is the kind of change we've all been waiting for," she said. Samuel looked at her with sincere appreciation. "Thank you, Laura. This achievement wouldn't have been possible without the support and dedication of allies like you." Martinez shrugged modestly. "I merely did what needed to be done. But you inspired people. That's something that will be remembered." As the evening wore on, Samuel returned to the solitude of his home. The celebration's echoes still resonated in his mind as he entered his study, a place of solace surrounded by familiar books and cherished mementos. The weight of the journey he had embarked upon settled heavily on his shoulders. Every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty, every step taken in steadfast belief. He reached for a framed photograph of his late wife, her smile offering comfort and strength even in her absence. "We did it, Grace," he whispered, his voice a blend of sorrow and pride. "I wish you could have been here to witness this moment." As Samuel leaned back in his chair, his thoughts turned to the future. The reforms represented merely the initial step in a long road ahead. There would be more hurdles to overcome, resistance to face, and battles to fight. Yet, for the first time in what felt like a long while, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. He confronted the system, challenged its flaws, and emerged with a victory that held the promise of transforming countless lives for the better. Maya entered the room quietly and took a seat beside him. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked gently. Samuel nodded, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of reassurance. "I'm all right, Maya. Just reflecting on how far we've come." Maya smiled softly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and determination. "And there's so much more to be done." Samuel chuckled, a sense of resolve in his voice. "Absolutely, but we'll tackle it one step at a time, together." In the weeks that followed the landmark ruling, Samuel and Maya immersed themselves in the monumental task of implementing the reforms they had fought so hard to achieve. They were tireless in their efforts, attending a myriad of community events, engaging with local schools, and collaborating closely with legal professionals to ensure the new measures were not only put into practice but maintained with integrity. The momentum of their movement continued to build, drawing in new supporters and forging fresh alliances. At one local high school, Samuel stood before an assembly of students, many of whom had followed his case with keen interest. The auditorium was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation as Samuel took the stage. He addressed the students with heartfelt sincerity about the significance of standing up for what is right, even when faced with adversity, and even when the path ahead seems daunting. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Samuel told them, his voice steady and encouraging. "It is the result of countless small actions, the bravery to speak out, and the readiness to listen and learn. Each one of you holds the power to make a meaningful difference. Remember that always." As he surveyed the eager faces before him, Samuel was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. His journey had begun as a quest to challenge a flawed system, but it had evolved into something greater. He had found a new role, not just as a judge, but as a mentor, an advocate, and a leader. The realization that he could inspire and guide the next generation filled him with profound satisfaction. Maya joined Samuel on stage, and together they fielded a barrage of questions from the students. They encouraged thoughtful discussion and critical engagement with the issues at hand. Their interaction with the students was not merely an exchange of ideas, but a collaborative effort to ignite a sense of responsibility and empowerment among the young people. Samuel came to understand that the future rested in their hands, and he was more than ready to play a role in guiding them toward it. The chapter closed with a poignant moment as Samuel and Maya walked hand in hand, side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight for justice was far from over, and they knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. However, they were bolstered by their shared courage, unity, and determination. The final note of their journey was one of hope and forward momentum. It served as a reminder that the quest for justice is an ongoing endeavor, but it remains within reach for those who are willing to dare and persevere. With each step, Samuel and Maya continued to demonstrate that change, while challenging, is always possible for those who strive for it with unwavering commitment. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found the story of Samuel Johnson both thought-provoking and powerful. As you reflect on his journey and the systemic issues it brings to light, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What have you learned from Samuel's story and the challenges he faced? Comment below with one key takeaway and share how you plan to bring that lesson into your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Your support helps us continue to create meaningful content that resonates with our community. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay inspired.